So, after a little bit more work, here's the state of the roll cage. The main hoop is bent. The cross bracing for the main hoop is in place. I have the lateral bars in place. A few other things that need to be done, but the lateral bars are now bent and sitting on top of the mounts that were made, so everything's getting lined up. My son's been working his butt off on it. Let's talk a little bit about roll cages. To build a roll cage, you need a bender and you need to be able to understand angles, measurements, things like that. So really what he's been doing is taking measurements that put the middle of a bend in a location, then determining what the angle of the bend should be. So for example, if that was a 66-degree bend, then coming up here, that bend right there would be a 24-degree bend, 22, somewhere in there, and then it continues on up. Same thing on the main hoop. You've determined what the measurements, the lengths are to the center of the bend, and then determine the radiuses of the bends, and then you make all those bends. Now you can buy a pre-bent roll cage kit for a lot of vehicles. They're really common for BMWs and Miatas and Civics, Acuras, things like that. They're pretty common, and you can weld that in. But when you're building a cage that's going into a car that's going to be raced with the sanctioning body, one thing every sanctioning body says is that the cage has to be welded and very specifically welded. So like 360 degrees around all seams. The weld quality has to be very good. Now, you're going to have the cage inspected, and whoever's inspecting the cage is ultimately going to make the decision as to whether your welds are good or not. If you're not a great welder, you probably shouldn't build your own cage. If you're a pretty good welder, you might get away with it. I'm a pretty good welder, but I'll still let my son do all the welding on this because he's a very good welder. And by doing very good welds versus pretty good welds, we'll definitely know that the cage will pass inspection and the vehicle will get a logbook. So that's where we're at. Cage is continuing on. Once the cage is complete, then I will turn my attention to wiring, and then we'll jump into suspension, engine, and transmission. So progress is still pretty good, and as of right now, we're still on track to make the first race of the season.